Hello everybody, my name is Andrew White and I am the CEO and founder of Transcend Space, and I'm here with
Andy Rumbles. I am the founder of Art Consulting and privileged to be a partner in Transcend Space.
And we're back talking about all things thresholds. So this podcast really is about our reflections, our views from being out there in the world, helping organizations face their thresholds. So this time, Andy, I want to talk about the AI threshold. I have been reading some interesting stuff. I know this is of interest to you. So if I may, I'm going to kick off with just a couple of minutes on some observations that I'm seeing, both firsthand but also through some data. So there was an article in the Financial Times. Its title, for anyone who wants to read it, How Much Value is AI Really Creating? And I think it was based on a paper that some academics had written. And for me, it was super interesting. There was one chart which looked at the number of app releases, which had gone exponential. You know, we all know how easy it is to create an app. But then another bit of data, which was apps with significant usage, had actually gone down. So for me, this is a potential performance gap, you know. There's a huge potential in AI and it's easy to create stuff. There's like a kind of an overflow of creativity. But actually it landing and grounding in practice, it attracting customers, it attracting revenue, there's a big gap between that. So that was data point one. Data point two, and this kind of links up with what I've seen as well, is that there's been a big increase in productivity gains when it comes to like small bits of efficiency gains within an organization. But actually that's spilling over into products much smaller. And what I think I've seen in large companies is they're applying AI to specific bits of their existing operation. I had a super interesting experience with someone recently who was basically using AI to redesign an entire industry. I think that flips back into the first problem I spoke about. A lot of potential. It clearly worked. But will he attract customers? Will he actually shift over from the potential to the performance gap? And then the final one I'll drop in. I was with a CEO of a business from Silicon Valley. And it was extraordinary. He had built a business that gave AI bots to people. So you could have a bot doing various things for you, both in your business life and everyday life. Revenue had gone from $1 million to $100 million in a year. So, like, to me, that was the most interesting bit. That was revenue. It wasn't valuation. He was attracting, so he was getting something right. There was a massive accelerator. So there is a threshold here, right? Before we go into, we might touch in some of the bigger societal stuff and what does it mean for people and jobs and stuff. But yeah, I'm right down at the level of companies today. Some people are massively accelerating. Some people are finding huge potential, but they're not crossing the threshold. And other people are trying to increment the status quo. They're not crossing the threshold into what's possible. So I think we're starting to see the dimensions of the AI threshold here. But I know I have one perspective. I'm over to you, mate, because you're also in this field and you're seeing stuff and you've got views as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, again, I saw that article. I loved the bit where it was talking about, you know, the application of the sort of the steam engine into like motors, and people putting them into factories back in the 1800s and seeing no material improvement. It's only when they started applying the motors down at the desk level that you saw the transformational productivity improvement. And I think that characterizes the very threshold that AI is representing for organizations at the moment, which is people are seeing it as a technology upgrade rather than a threshold moment. So they are taking what they see as a tool and they are bolting it onto the old ways of working. So they're trying to take their operating models, their business models, their organizational designs, and adding AI to it, often use case by use case, sometimes aligned to a coherent strategy, sometimes not. But what they're fundamentally doing is taking all of the human to human bottlenecks and applying technology to them. So all you've done is made the pain and the inefficiency more automated, and you may have made that bit of the activity faster, but overall you have changed nothing. So when you kind of boil that back up, the threshold moment comes through, I think, a multitude of points. I think the first is, what is it you now need to let go of? And you need to now let go of the fact that your business models and your operating models are no longer truly relevant in the same way that they were in this new age of AI. And it is not about bolting on, it is reimagining the potential with AI as this kind of infused layer that allows you to do something quite significant. So I'd say that's the first thing, and we can get into each. I'll kind of go through a few points and then we can maybe unpack them. I think the second big thing for me is conflating output and activity for value. Lots of people are trying to do more, but they haven't actually sat back and said, what does value look like on the other side of that threshold? What is it that the world is calling me to do, my customers are calling me to do? And how do I redesign for value, not just more throughput? Which is why you get Ivanti saying that only 20% of organizations are reporting a significant productivity improvement, but more importantly, McKinsey coming back and saying 80% are saying no material EBIT difference for all of those billions of dollars that they've put in, because value is fundamentally different to activity. And then I think the last thing is some people have gone the other way on thresholds. They've assumed that they're AI ready, and they've just shot across this thing without really experimenting what was on the other side of the threshold. They didn't necessarily understand the threshold they were crossing. So now there's a bit of an identity crisis going on in terms of, well, I am AI, but I'm not AI, and I am AI. And they hadn't really taken the time to experiment. I've got lots more thoughts about how you actually learn at the edge, but I'll stop there, Andrew. But that's my sort of my three things.
And have you seen a company which really has done this well, that's really got a solution or a intervention that's really getting traction, where you feel it's really crossed the threshold? Or are most people still in that place, in your view, where they're making attempts?
I think it would be fair to say that nearly every organisation I've encountered is still making attempts. There is some interesting work coming out around this concept of an organisational singularity. So a singularity is a notion that where we'll reach it when AI self-generates and self-learns and the rest of it. Now we're getting to a point where people are talking about an organizational singularity, where an organization starts to learn, and it's through like recursive learning in AI. But what is happening is people are starting to, there's some experiments going on at the moment which is showing it, there's a thesis that it's almost impossible to innovate inside organizations. You can only do it at the edge. So what they're doing is they're creating digital twins of organizations, and then they're pulling across workflows, sort of enhancing it and completely taking out all of the human-like loops, like taking 10 approvals down to 3 and applying the AI, and the AI is now starting to learn, and it's becoming more efficient. And once it's proven, they bring another workflow. And there's some startups in particularly around San Francisco that are doing this quite at scale, and they're now at the point where they're looking at sort of 20 to 30% of the existing workforce is required in this world. It's, senior leaders are becoming about judgment, decision making, and then middle management's massively compressed, and it's actually about checking and assuring the decisions being made by AI. That is happening, and organizations are doing it. But there's always an early adopter, kind of mindset. But when you go back into the kind of the law of diffusion in terms of the distribution curve, I'm not seeing many large organizations doing that. But the ones that are starting to get success, and some of the multiples are in the 50x multiple type thing for some of these small startups, it's innovating at the edge that's allowing people to do that, because they've created an environment which is not beholden to the old world. It's let go of everything, and it is building purely for that AI native environment, and that is allowing them to transform.
And so those startups are doing it on themselves, or are they consultancies to large organizations?
They're doing it themselves using sort of some of the more kind of moonshot type people thinking, people who actually do builders, not necessarily consultants, but people who build the actual agents, and they're working at that edge. And interestingly, when you listen to the process they're going through, it's a lot of the stuff I used to do in a non-AI world, which was actually starting of where do we want to be in 3 years, and then they all call it back casting. I used to call it future back, but working back, where do you need to be? And then saying, actually, what would that now look like for sources of value? And then how do you start to bring over initially just maybe safer, high volume, low value kind of workflows and start to drive the automation, not the automation, the AI implementation, and then slowly bringing over. And that way they are safely transforming rather than trying to hit the cash cow, the actual revenue engine, and putting that at risk. They're building a distinct organization and then almost like a skunk works and pulling things over when it's ready.
So that could be applied to a large organization.
It can.
It sounds similar. It's different to the whole corporate venturing work that was popular in the 90s. This was when large organizations believed they need to change. They, rather than try and do it from within the firm, they set up like internal venture capital.
Yeah.
The problem with that, those things lasted for about 7 years. The status quo killed them because at the point at which they started to get successful, they would challenge the power of the status quo, and the power in the organization was more embedded. They had the larger budgets, they had more political, small p political power in the organization. So this requires some really strong leadership from the top, and it requires leaders that are both deeply attached and not attached to the status quo. Deeply attached because that's where they make the money today, and not attached because they're going to make money in a very different way in the future. And I don't meet many people like that. I don't meet many people who can be simultaneously those two things, hence why it's more in the startup territory. And there is serious risk of being disrupted here, I think, because those big organizations have not been designed to radically change. You used the word friction. They've got a lot of deliberate friction, intentional friction that slow down change, slow down decision making, multiple layers of governance, committees, and complex power arrangements. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, and where does real transformation, real value actually start to get accrued.
And ultimately, I mean, they are on a, everyone, you said about, the status quo killed them in the corporate venturing space, but the status quo is deeply unlikely to survive this. So I guess one of the core thesis of organizations was it is cheaper and easier to collaborate and coordinate within an organizational boundary than outside. If you had them on payroll, you could direct people to where they're going, etc., etc. What this new generation of AI does is it makes collaboration, coordination zero. So it basically eliminates the need to have these, what is basically justified a middle management for the best part of 60, 70, 80 years. You no longer need that. You have layers of agents that are going through different types of intelligence to make decisions. And you now need a much thinner layer that is testing the judgment and taking overall decision making. And you need people at the bottom layer to be able to come in and make sure, again, monitoring some more of the more tactical AI type stuff. But organizations that are showing up with 20% of the workforce with much faster kind of OODA loop sort of cycles of being able to observe and make decisions are going to kill these big organizations. I mean, I saw something the other day. I heard somebody on a podcast say that they got to a realization with agentic AI that it is now faster to design the feature than to have the meeting to talk about the feature. Like AI can now generate genuine features and outputs faster than we can get everybody together over a few days to try and figure out what the feature could look like. That is not a sustainable model for large organizations that are operating on decision-making loops in the weeks and months.
Yeah. And it raises an interesting question around what is the future of work? What is the work that humans do? And because we can't just let technology do its own thing. I mean, We've all got experience of putting things into ChatGPT, coming back, looking at it, realizing maybe we did the wrong prompt. The prompt wasn't broad enough. What came back was partial. It needs people to check it. I mean, a bit like a manager checks a worker.
Yeah.
Right. There's that oversight. But what skills do you need to do that is a question. How many people you need to do that is another question. Because this probably requires a great deal of technical expertise and deep wisdom around what's really going on in all that complex decision making. So there's a new type of leader that's required that's both technically very, very capable and deeply, let's call it high levels of wisdom or experience around the industry norms, regulatory compliance, customers, supply chains, etc. And most of the leaders that are coming through probably haven't been promoted on that basis. They've been promoted because they could get stuff done in the status quo world. So it's an interesting time for leaders. It's an interesting time for what is an organization. It's an interesting time for how do you really create value in this new world. This is a threshold, right? It's a threshold that's not, yes, it is at the level of an individual firm. It's also going to profoundly affect individuals, I think. But also it's going to shape whole industries. And how we get our heads around that and how governments come into this is also going to be a big factor as it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, and go even higher, it's going to reshape economics. I mean, the people are talking about GDPs going up 50x. That's not even, you can always, theorists always give you these amazing numbers and you can challenge it, but essentially we're going to end up into this massive abundance. But actually, what does that mean if you're a graduate coming out of university? How do you develop the wisdom and the experience to be able to know how to guide an AI? How do we build the CEOs of a future when that sort of track to the top is being slowly kind of eviscerated by AI? Do you become an apprenticeship to CEO level? Are we back into guilds and all this kind of world? Are we going to start bringing back some of the things that architected us before the knowledge kind of management era, so knowledge worker era? So all of these things start to become really interesting. And then what does that now mean for the role of government? People have been talking about universal basic incomes and stuff for a while now. Well, if we've got a much more vibrant economy and possibly a smaller number of people doing specific roles, what does that look like? There's another theory that says, actually, if it's only, if organizations are going from 100% to 20% of the workforce, that might sound dystopian. The other view is that this could unleash entrepreneurship on a whole new level, and we might build 5 times as many organizations. So these are all really big societal level thresholds, as well as organizational, team and individual. But for now, if you're a leader of an organization, you have probably, people are saying you've got about a year or two to figure this out, because the new wave of organizations are coming through, and they will be coming with an agility and an exponential kind of learning cycle and response time that are traditional organizations really going to struggle to match. So this is prescient.
Everything that we've spoken about in the 20 minutes or so that we've been going is human.
Yes.
All the money is going into tech, right? The trillions, it's got to be that now, investment in tech. But everything we've spoken about is human. It's about skills, it's about decision making, it's about transformation of individuals. What does that mean if I'm a graduate? What does that mean if I'm a CEO? What does that mean if I'm an entrepreneur? What does that mean if I'm a prime minister, if I'm a minister, if I'm a member of a parliament, if I'm a civil servant, somebody putting the policy frameworks in place? It's all human, right? And, what I saw recently listening to a couple of presentations on this was that if AI puts 10x on technological capability, we need a 10x on human capability. And I don't hear that much. We're out of weight on this, or unbalanced, to use a transcend. Something's not balanced here. There's something that's motoring in terms of technology, and we're hearing about this all the time. But what's that consciousness shift? What's that capability shift? Mindset shift, identity shift. This makes this a deeply human threshold, from individuals right the way up to countries.
Indeed, and actually, when you look at the risks of AI as well, like the ethics, the morality around AI, these are all deeply human questions as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I was listening to an interview, a podcast with Dan Clark, who's the co-founder of Anthropic, who was actually British, which I didn't realise until the other day. Which there you go. And he said, he sees Anthropic as building like the equivalent of nuclear power plants. We're fueling the future of the economy. But every now and again, we accidentally create a nuclear bomb, like we create mythos that could, absolutely hack to death every organisation, every government, and completely and utterly like undermine the basis of our collective economy. So the question about can the technology do something or not is a technological question, but inherently should we allow, and how do we control what could be a bit like we control bioweapons or nuclear weapons? How do we now start to talk about the ramifications of AI onto society as a whole, both economically but also structurally and from a safety perspective, is an entirely human question. And actually, therefore, not only is it about the success of us as individuals, organizations, and everything else, the very future of I guess our human race, our countries, etc., is down to the very human questions that we have, which are deeply profound. Like, do you try and limit progress in AI to save humanity? Is that even achievable? How do you regulate cross countries or cross organizations? Every aspect of AI, which is about its ability to create value, its safety, its transformative effects, its role in the economy, every single one of those is a human question. And as you say, I don't know whether it's 10xing human capability, because I don't think it's about something exponential per se, but it's about equipping people, having the right conversations, equipping with people, and finding new frameworks to have those conversations, which is why I like Threshold so much. It might help the conversation about how do you bring competing incentives into a room and find alignment about some of these big threshold or AI related threshold questions.
And I think as you're talking, I think what I recognize is that the way technology is developed, it's been like this evolutionary soup, and the tech industries produce stuff. Consumers have either consumed it or not consumed it. On the whole, the tech industry is really good, and so consumers have consumed that. Governments have had to wake up and try to regulate it, often way too late, as we see with social media, and the harm that that's causing. This is about intention, right? And bringing more intention and the human in much more balance with the technology. That to me is the threshold. We've got to bring intention back into this. And there's a bit of learned helplessness when it comes to tech. Oh, it will be what it will be. We can't control it. Well, why not? We control firearms. That's a technology. We heavily regulate cars because of the danger that they can cause. Someone told me recently there's more regulation on a child's playground than there is on the phone that's in their hand. So we regulate other technology. We bring intention. We think about risks, safeguards, how to get the best out of it. And so there's something of this that is my sense that we need to become better at. And that starts with governments and being much more involved, but we know they're not particularly good at it, generally speaking. Hence why they've been more hands off and let it run. But I don't know. This is coming more into, society. It's got the potential to make the problems we've experienced in social media even worse in some areas. And so it requires this upshifting capability of mindset that brings more intention. I think whatever level you're at.
Yeah. Also, I mean, this is a very strange analogy for a second, but I've been doing some work with a board of a charity, and they spend a lot of time talking about retail shops rather than a whole range of other opportunities that they could go after. And I ask, why is it such a passionate topic? And it's like, well, because we all shop, so we know shopping, so we're happy talking about shopping. And it's almost like this with AI in organizations and leaders at the moment, because it's an area where there's, they're very happy talking about existing operating models and, ERPs and Salesforce. We know this. We've known this intrinsically for the last 20, 30 years. So there is something about leaders having both the curiosity and the vulnerability right now to step into areas that they deeply don't understand, where the people at the bottom of their organization are probably 10 times more qualified than they are, to being able to even discuss these topics. So right now this is time for humility, vulnerability, and curiosity. And even if as a leaders you want to talk about this threshold, apart from the fact it's, the first most important step is being aware that you are at one. It's also, who do you engage through this process? Who do you bring into this story to help you, you not knowing, again, back to the leaders don't need to have all the answers, they need to have the best questions. Now is the time to start posing the questions and figuring out how do you get people to support you in that? Because otherwise you will continue to try and apply old frameworks to what's a fundamentally different paradigm.
Yeah. Andy, we're at time. Really interesting discussion. My sense this is one we're going to come back to. Let's get out there and try and find some real examples of organizations who are at this threshold. We've been deliberately a bit abstract with this one, where we're normally more down in a case. We're going to come back to a case next time we record, and let's try and find an organization that's really trying to cross this threshold and really trying to address some of the challenges we're talking with.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. Onwards.
See you later, my friend. Take care.
Take care. Bye.